Are you using newspapers to tackle your genealogy brick walls? In this document right here, I learned a lot about John Townley, but is it my ancestor? Today, I'm going to show you how newspapers helped me learn a lot about who my ancestor is and who my ancestor is not, and that way you can begin to utilize these periodicals to climb your family tree. Come along and research over my shoulder. When I'm exploring newspapers for John and Effingham, I'm looking for a number of things. The first thing I'm looking for is for any record that said that John moved from Elizabeth to Cincinnati. If you've watched my video about keyword research about your ancestors' travels, I will utilize a lot of those keywords to see if I can pull out an article about John moving to Cincinnati. I'm also looking for any articles that could designate who his father was. Sometimes there's articles in newspapers where a heir who's living away from their parents will have a notice in the papers that said, hey, John Townley, son of Effingham Townley of Elizabethtown, New Jersey, just inherited land. That's great if you can find it. I'm also doing my last search of George W. Townley and Major J. Townley. I have established that they're not brothers of John, they're not close cousins of John, but if there's any article that talks about George and Major from Elizabethtown, New Jersey, well, maybe they're also going to include John, who's also from the same place in that article. I also need to check records over in New Jersey for Effingham Townley. Is there anything that ties him to a John in Cincinnati? Is there anything that ties him to a John that died? I'm going to search for both men in both locations. Now, this is a time when you have to search multiple databases in order to answer your question. Newspapers.com, that I have been using a lot in this series and on this channel, did not have the newspapers that served Elizabethtown, New Jersey at the time I needed to research. So I switched over to Genealogy Bank, and I was able to find one newspaper article that fit my parameters of Effingham Townley in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. Not every entry in newspapers is going to give you everything you need, wanted, or hoped for. But you can help build the case that your ancestors are in the place that you think they're supposed to be. And that's the case of this clipping. Effingham died in Elizabethtown, New Jersey in 1828. I already knew that. But if I'm also trying to establish what date that he died on, I have the will date, I have when it went into probate, and now I also have this newspaper article to help lock down that date of death. So it is handy. It isn't a total loss, but dang it wasn't the clue I was looking for. Now in Cincinnati, there were some John Townleys in the newspapers throughout John's life. And invariably, it's not the John I was hoping for. So as I teased earlier, there's this John Townley. This John Townley is actually a nephew of George and Major Townley. He's the insurance man that was alluded to in an earlier video where it said John Townley, famous insurance man, died at the time where my fourth great grandfather died. Yeah, the newspapers made a mistake. So be very, very careful when you're looking at newspapers. Sometimes errors creep in. He was not the famous insurance man, my fourth great grandfather. That is an entirely different John Townley. Boy, how I wish John A. Townley was my direct ancestor. He appears in the newspapers so much. We see the land transactions. We see what his favorite cigar was. We see where he ate. And the fact that he got sued. Now, my John Townley did appear in a few documents. In 1844, he had some letters to pick up at the post office. Now, you may think that is an insignificant entry in newspapers, but actually it helps you establish when and where somebody lived. Not only that, who's sending him mail? Could it be family members from some other location? I hope so. Now, I had hoped that Aunt John would appear in some of the land record entries that were recorded in newspapers. George Townley was recorded in newspapers about buying land through his sheriff's sale. So I had hoped John would appear in the records as well, but I haven't found him. Now, before we continue to something that I definitely want you to pay attention to in newspapers, I want to call your attention to the show notes for this video. I go into a lot more depth of some of the discoveries I made, and you can also find my messy middle research notes to follow along on the discoveries I've made. Be sure to find that link in the description. Now, back to the really cool discovery. The next entry I found for John Townley was in 1848, where he served as a juror in a court case. I could then go research the court case to add a little more flavor when I'm writing about John Townley's in his family history, but that just doesn't really help answer my question, so I just move on to the next clipping. Now, there was one little discovery that I thought would be kind of fun, given the current election craziness that's going on in the United States. And that was when I discovered the party that George W. Townley belonged to. He was active in the Whig party. Now, I talked to my son. He thinks it's so funny that it's Whig because he's thinking W-I-G rather than W-H-I-G. But that party no longer exists. So it's fun to talk to him about the past and the past political parties and how things have changed greatly since that time. Now, John Townley, my fourth great-grandfather, his children begin to appear in the newspapers about the 1860s. I really love all of the articles that I have found for his son, Richard Townley, who was a police officer in Cincinnati. We get a lot of beat reports. There's an article of him being stabbed. There's articles of him going to court and against his stabber and some other situations. It's really kind of fun, the things that you can find in newspapers. Didn't help answer my question, so you have to be very careful. Use that genealogy research plan to be hyper-focused on what you're looking for. Based on the goals that I had for newspaper research, how did things line up after my exhaustive search of newspapers.com and Genealogy Bank? Well, I did not get the clue that definitively states that John is the son of Effingham of Elizabethtown, New Jersey. However, the beauty of newspaper research is that sometimes you can get to know your ancestors so well that when you're walking down the street, you can pick them out of the crowd. The other thing that newspapers help me do is realize that John Townley does not interact socially with George and Major Townley. But also, I can see the dramatic difference in socioeconomic status of George and Major and John. John was a bricklayer throughout all of his life. He's probably not going to be showing up in a lot of newspapers unless he gets sued, gets arrested, gets drunk, dies in some mysterious circumstance, or makes some amazing creation in his bricklaying business. Meanwhile, George and Major are recorded with a lot of details. Their travels, their court cases they're suing, and on and on and on. I'm thankful that I went and explored newspapers. I'm disappointed that my ancestor didn't get a lot of ink, but I still learned a little bit more than I had originally started out with. However, I'm glad you stuck around this far. However, in a previous video, I talked about how the Townleys that are descended of John desperately want to establish their relationship for the famous Colonel Richard Townley, who was an original settler of Elizabethtown, New Jersey, and was active in all the politics there. There's another reason why the Townleys want to connect to Lord Effingham Townley. And that is from the newspaper articles that deal with the Lawrence Townley estate. Now, have you ever heard of people trying to establish their links so that they can acquire a huge inheritance from England and titles and properties and stuff? Well, that was what was going on with the descendants of John Townley. In 1845, there is a notice put in the Newark newspaper that asks people who have the surname Townley to show up at a meeting and bring all of your documentation, your Bibles, your marriage certificates, anything that establishes your pedigree, and bring it to this meeting because there's a large sum of money and inheritance at stake. Unfortunately, George, Major, Edward, and John Townley are all living in Cincinnati at this time. So if there's anybody taking the family records to this meeting, it is the relations of George and Major and Edward, the brothers, their side of the Townley family, and then hopefully John's potential brother Richard to that meeting for the Effingham line. You would think that would be the end of it. But in the Cincinnati newspapers from 1875 to 1888, you're going to constantly see these newspaper articles pop up throughout that time period talking about the inheritance, and that individuals in Cincinnati have established their line to the Lawrence Townley estate. Now, I'm still kind of confused at whether the 1845 and 1875 cases are the same, because now it requires me to do research into probate claims that I believe will be over in England, because that's where the estate has to be settled, and I don't know how to do that yet. So if someone knows how to do that, let me know in the comments or shoot me an email. You can find my email on our website, familyhistoryfanatics.com. What I find fascinating is I think I found the trigger for the family legend that says that we are tied into the Lord Effingham of England. If I could establish it, that would be great. There would be another place that I want to put on my list of places to visit, Cornwall, England, to see Andy's family and to take a pole dart tour, but also to go and find my origin of the Townley line. There's still more research to do, but I have to leave newspapers and go on to something else. So stick around for the next video that will pop up right up here. And if you're ready for the latest video from Family History Fanatics, check out this one right here. Man, throughout this whole video, it's just itch.